Hey everyone, welcome back to part 2 of every MLB team's worst lineup of the 2000s. If you missed it, in part 1 we did every National League team, so this video will be all of the American League teams. Not gonna waste too much time here, let's jump right in. We're gonna start off with the Baltimore Orioles, and it's kind of easy pickings here. We could choose any team from the last 5 years in any game and likely come away with an acceptably paltry lineup for this list. So we're gonna dial it back a couple seasons to late 2019, where their 108 loss season was actually a 7-win improvement from the year before. They faced off against future Oriole Jorge Lopez and the Kansas City Royals, sending out a lineup full of minor league mainstays and unproven youngsters. We have Chris Davis with the worst OPS of anyone here in the middle of the lineup, on-base god Jace Peterson in the 8-hole, and a collective batting average from top to bottom of 196. They mustered just 6 hits and a 9-1 loss, no shock there. For the Boston Red Sox, they're known as a storied franchise with consistent on-field success and have been for decades now. But in between the transition from Terry Francona to John Farrell, there comes the long-lost 2012 season that Boston fans don't talk about. The foundation collapsed completely because of poor leadership from Bobby Valentine and bloated, expensive contracts, which led to their only sub-70 win season in the last 50 years. There's no better example of their mediocrity during this lost season than the first game of their losing sweep to the Yankees to close the year, as part of a 1-12 stretch to close the season. No Jacoby Ellsbury, Dustin Pedroia, Big Papi, or any other recognizable faces here. This lineup featured the likes of journeyman catcher Ryan Lavarnway DHing for some reason, cleanup hitting Mauro Gomez, that's a name I haven't really heard of, and a guy named Chase Swan Lin patrolling center. This is the same club that has 4 rings in the last 20 years. How did something like this even happen? For the White Sox, my entry is actually going to come from the most recent season, shockingly enough, where they dominated the American League Central en route to a playoff berth. They had the division wrapped up by the halfway point in the season, if we're being completely honest, but some injuries to star players led to some pretty hilarious lineups in the second half. My choice comes from a 5-0 shutout against Kansas City in July, which featured a fairly normal 1-4, and then of course Andrew Vaughn playing second base for some reason. Don't forget Danny Mendick, Zach Collins, and Billy Hamilton rounding out the bottom third of the lineup, all with OPSs under 690 at the time. Nice. This lineup isn't even that horrible, just really bad for a team that won their division that year. Certain games hold special weight in this list for me, specifically opening day lineups and playoff lineups. An egregious example of the former option comes from the 2019 Cleveland Indians, a team that ended the season with 93 wins despite not making the playoffs. With injuries to middle infield mainstays Francisco Lindor and Jason Kipnis, as well as the trade for Franmil Reyes months away, this Indians opening day lineup doesn't shape up to be too intimidating at all. I'm sure the team was expecting far more production out of Jake Bauers and Leonis Martin, but they were doomed from the start when they had Hanley Ramirez in the middle of this thing. This starting 9 was 2 hit by Jose Barrios and a shutout loss to the eventual division-winning team, the Minnesota Twins. For the Tigers, I feel a little bad picking on the recent teams from the mid to late 2010s, being that Dave Dombrowski buried them into a deep rebuild. But this lineup from early 2019 was genuinely the best they could put forth, and it's pretty funny to look back on, especially considering that the 2021 team is miles ahead of this roster. With slumping Josh Harrison and Heimer Candelario at the top, this Tigers lineup against the Twins gets very thin very quickly. Kristen Stewart, of Twilight fame of course, is batting cleanup here. Dustin Peterson was a name that stumped me, and we can add in his 3 strikeouts as well. We also got Grayson Greiner behind the dish, my personal pick for the most uncomfortable name to say out loud in MLB. Something about a double gruh sound just irks me. It shouldn't come as a shock as to which era the Astros lineup is going to come from, because long before they went to 5 ALCSs in a row, the Astros were the worst team in the league for a few consecutive years, losing at least 106 games every year from 2011 to 2013. Perhaps their worst lineup in recent memory came at the tail end of that final miserable year before their turnaround. In a 2-1 loss to the Angels, the Astros sent out a starting 9 with Trevor Crow in the 3-hole. Who? 3 different first basemen and Mark Krause, Chris Carter, and Brett Wallace, and Matt Pagnozzi, who was a name I remembered in the deep crevices of my weird brain. I don't know why. For the Royals, it's been a while since they've been competitive, but my selection for them is actually going to come from their World Series year in 2015. We're not going to talk about who they faced. It's another one of those day after clinching hangover lineups, which are particularly fun for me, and it's arguably the best one that I've found so far. Against Cookie Carrasco and the Indians, the Royals gave out rest days to Eric Hosmer, Alcides Escobar, Moose, and Salvador Perez. Outside of Ben Zobrist, the lone everyday starter in this lineup, every OPS listed here is under 720, making for an all-time lineup. We have first baseman Drew Butera, he's a catcher by the way, Chesler Cuthbert at the hot corner, and Paolo Orlando Bilodeau, the Frenchman, batting cleanup. No surprise here, but Cookie twirled a one-hit shutout with ease against this starting 9, but I'm not sure they cared too much. The Angels always end up mediocre each season despite the top-heavy talent of their roster, but one thing I feel like we can always count on them for is a decent lineup. That's why this lineup from late August in 2016 is so perplexing. As far as I know, no injuries plague their roster at this point, everyone just had an off day on the same day. This left them with a lineup that looks like it's supposed to belong to the Salt Lake Bees. 1 through 3 is totally fine like most of these lineups, but then we got Brewers legend Jet Bandy in the 5-hole and a guy named Nick Buss in the 9-hole who I've never heard of. I'm sure he's bussin' though, right? Sorry. And of course, Ricky Nolasco tossed a 2-hit shutout so they were able to scratch a 2-0 win by the Reds, because that makes so much sense. Who remembers Ricky Nolasco and the Angels? Anyway, the Minnesota Twins had a nice 4-year stretch of competitive play up until their 2021 collapse, but prior to that, the team was mired in mediocrity for years on end. They lost more than 90 games from 2011 to 2013, and my selection for their worst lineup comes from the final year of that window. Big shoutouts to Trevor Plouffe, who hit third for this team during their matchup with the White Sox. He's one of the lone good hitters in this lineup, and that's not just me brown-nosing to another company man. Outside of Coach Trev and Brian Dozier, the lineup featured some long-lost names and guys like cleanup hitter Oswaldo Arcia, who had some pretty decent pop. We also have Chris Colabello before his Blue Jays outburst, and Cleet Thomas, the guy with a baseball first name through and through. They scratched off a 4-3 win against the Chicago team that was somehow 5 wins worse than them. Most Yankees fans can probably figure out what season their lineup is going to come from, and that's 2013. When you check out their opening day lineup from this year, it's not hard to understand why. Without the help of core players like Derek Jeter, Alex Rodriguez, Curtis Granderson, and Mark Teixeira, their lineup was bad. They could only manage 2 runs against John Lester in the loss at home, but the worst part of this game by far remains Kevin Youkilis in a Yankees jersey. It'll never look right. It never should have happened. Why did this happen? The whole 2010s decade for the Oakland A's is extremely weird and inconsistent. After making the playoffs 3 years in a row from 2012 to 2014, they followed that up with 3 straight last place finishes in the AL West. We're going to jump to year 1 of that stretch in September of 2015. 20 games below 500 with a month to go usually means that your season is over, so the A's were probably punting some games at this point, giving us one of our best lineups on today's list. We got forgotten small ball legend Billy Burns at the top, great name by the way, Danny Valencia somehow slipping into the cleanup role, and Josh Fegley behind the dish. Almost got that right. Add in Tyler Leidendorf, who I have zero recollection of, and you've got yourself a lineup that somehow scores 8 runs and still loses. Also, congrats to Tyler Leidendorf, he made it back to the show in 2021 with the Cubs. Good for him. The team that handed the A's that loss was the Mariners, and they were rolling out some putrid lineups just a season before. There's plenty of bad Seattle baseball to choose from, but we're going to jump to 2014 for this selection. There are lots of lovable faces on this Seattle team that was still hovering around 500 at the time. Mets legends Endy Chavez and John Buck make the cut, as well as journeymen Stephen Romero and Cole Gillespie. No, not Connor. We don't talk about Connor here. We also have high draft pick legend Nick Franklin, who never really panned out, but this lineup was able to scratch out 3 runs against Drew Smyly, enough for the win. The Tampa Bay Rays are another team that was hard to find a truly bad lineup for. They've been consistently decent for the past decade or so, scratching a few seasons. For their entry, let's go back to 2012. This lineup is more fun than it is bad, by the way. For their primetime game against the Orioles, Joe Maddon went with a lineup of leadoff first baseman and slugger Carlos Pena, which confused me at the time but actually looks good in retrospect, being that his .342 on-base percentage led the team. But we also can't forget about Hideki Matsui batting 6th, remember when he was a Ray? As well as a guy named Drew Sutton, who again, I've never heard of, and of course, Jose Lobaton, Mets legend. This lineup mustered just 2 hits against Brian Mattis. For the Rangers, it's hard to remember a time where the team was good. It's also hard to remember a time where the Rangers were as bad as they were in 2021, so that made this selection pretty easy. I'm glad they spent big to lock up an all-star middle infield, because this lineup against the Astros from last September is actually putrid. Nobody featured in this lineup had an OPS above 760 at the time. Utility fielder Brock Holt was DHing for some reason, a guy named Yohel Pozo caught, and I adore his name, and cleanup hitter DJ Peters had a nice OBP of 249. Unsurprisingly, they got clapped by a score of 12-1 to drop their record to 38 games below 500. Rangers fans, I'm hoping things turn around for you guys next year. Last up on today's list is the Toronto Blue Jays, and I think the Blue Jays are going to be awesome next season, and had they won that one extra game in 2021 and made made the playoffs, I think they would have made a deep run. That makes it easy to forget that just a couple years ago, this team was still very much in the trenches, desperately trying to speed up their rebuild. A specifically bad lineup came very early in the 2019 season against the Indians, and looking back at it is pretty difficult. I love Billy McKinney, but in no world is he a 3-hitting DH at the major league level. A lot of these guys you might recognize as bench guys or quadruple A players, but they were getting regular reps in Toronto during this time. Luke Malley, Freddie Galvis, Brandon Drury, Socrates Brito. This was seriously the best Toronto could do before their young core was finally ready. Worst of all, they had to face Shane Bieber in that game, and it makes sense why they lost 3-2. But better days are ahead for Toronto fans, so we can look back and laugh at this one. And there you go. That's every American League team's worst lineup of the 2000s. I want to thank everyone for giving these videos such a positive reception. It was a lot of fun, and it was all birthed from some random tweet that I fired off just a couple weeks ago. Your interactions with me help improve the quality of this channel, and I couldn't be more thankful. Also want to shout you guys out for helping the channel reach 30,000 subscribers. That's an awesome milestone, and I'm forever indebted to you all. That'll do it for this video. I'm the Jolly Olive, and I'll see you guys next time.